Daniel had been staring at his computer screen for the past 6 hours and his eyes felt like sandpaper. Working from home as a freelance graphic designer had its perks, but some days it felt like the walls of his small Portland apartment were closing in on him. He stretched his arms above his head, hearing his shoulders crack, and decided to call it a day. It was one of those gray October afternoons where the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything damp and quiet. Daniel grabbed his keys and headed downstairs to check the mailbox, hoping for something more interesting than bills and takeout menus. That's when he saw it. A large cardboard box sat on his doorstep, bigger than anything he'd ordered recently. Actually, he hadn't ordered anything at all in the past few weeks. He'd been trying to save money for a new laptop. Daniel bent down and tried to lift it. Heavy. Whatever was inside had some weight to it. He dragged the box inside and set it on his kitchen table. The shipping label was slightly water-damaged, but he could make out his address clearly enough. What caught his attention was the name, Robert Sullivan, not Daniel Kim. He checked the address again. Definitely his apartment number, definitely his street. Just the wrong name. Daniel figured he should just refuse the delivery and send it back, but curiosity got the better of him. Maybe there was a phone number inside or some easy way to contact this Robert Sullivan person. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and carefully cut through the tape. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap and old newspaper, was a wooden box. It looked old, really old, with intricate carvings on the lid that had faded with time, the kind of thing you'd see in an antique shop with a price tag that made you walk away quickly. Daniel lifted it out carefully and set it on the table. The wooden box wasn't locked. The lid opened with a soft creak and Daniel found himself staring at someone else's entire history. Photographs, dozens of them, were stacked neatly inside. On top was a black and white picture of two young men in military uniforms, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera like they didn't have a care in the world. They couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Daniel picked up the photograph and studied it more closely. Something about one of the faces looked familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. The soldier on the left had dark hair and a wide smile. The one on the right was taller, with lighter hair and freckles across his nose. Beneath the photographs were letters, tied together with string that had yellowed with age. Daniel knew he probably shouldn't read someone else's mail, but the envelopes weren't sealed. They were old V-mail letters, the kind soldiers sent home during Vietnam. He carefully pulled one out and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat but hurried. "Dear Bobby," it began. "I hope this letter finds you well. Things have been rough here, but knowing you've got my back keeps me going. Remember that promise we made? Brothers forever, no matter what happens. When we get home, first round's on me." It was signed simply, Dave. Daniel felt like he was intruding on something deeply personal, but he couldn't stop himself from looking through more of the contents. There were military medals, ribbons he didn't recognize, and more photographs. Some showed larger groups of soldiers. Others were of landscapes that must have been taken in Vietnam. Jungle paths, makeshift camps, young men trying to smile for the camera despite the exhaustion in their eyes. Then he found another photograph, and his hand froze. It was tucked near the bottom of the box, slightly larger than the others. The same two soldiers from the first picture, but in this one they were standing in front of a helicopter. The image was clearer, less faded, and on the uniform of the dark-haired soldier, Daniel could just barely make out the name tape. Chen. His heart started beating faster. Chen was his last name, his father's last name. Daniel set the photo down and ran his hand through his hair. This was crazy. There had to be thousands of people with the last name Chen who served in Vietnam. It was just a coincidence. Except the face. Now that he was looking for it, really looking, he could see the resemblance. The shape of the eyes, the way the mouth curved when smiling. It looked like his father, but that was impossible. His father had died when Daniel was only 8 years old. A heart attack, sudden and unexpected, that left Daniel and his mother struggling to make sense of a world without him. Daniel's memories of his father were fragmentary at best. A laugh, the smell of aftershave, strong hands lifting him onto broad shoulders. He had maybe a dozen photographs of his dad, most of them from when Daniel was very young. What he didn't have was any pictures of his father in uniform. His mother had told him that his dad served in Vietnam, but she never talked about it much. It was a hard time for him, she'd say. He didn't like to remember it. Daniel had learned not to ask questions. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the photograph, then zoomed in as far as he could. The name tape definitely said Chen, and the more he looked at the face, the more certain he became. This was his father. Young, healthy, alive, standing next to someone named Bobby, who was probably this Robert Sullivan person. Daniel sat back in his chair, his mind racing. How had this package ended up at his door? Was it really just a delivery mistake, or was there something more to it? And who was Robert Sullivan? His father had never mentioned a Robert or a Bobby or anyone from his time in the war. He carefully went through the rest of the box's contents. There were more letters, some from Dave to Bobby, others from Bobby to Dave. They spoke of fear and friendship, of wanting to go home, of promises to stay in touch when the war finally ended. There was a small notebook filled with addresses and phone numbers, most of them crossed out or faded beyond reading. At the very bottom of the box, Daniel found a piece of paper that looked newer than everything else. It was an old address written in shaky handwriting, an address in Tacoma, Washington, dated from about 30 years ago. Next to it, someone had written Dave's last known address and then crossed it out. Below that, in different ink, was Daniel's current address in Portland, his actual current address. This wasn't a random delivery mistake. Someone had meant for this box to come here to him, but why? And how did they know where he lived? Daniel looked at the shipping label again, this time more carefully. The return address was in Tacoma too, but there was no name, just a P.O. box number. The package had been sent just last week. He picked up the photograph of the two soldiers again. His father and Robert Sullivan, young and full of hope, had no idea what the future held. His father would die too young, leaving behind a wife and a small son. And Robert Sullivan? Where was he now? And why, after all these years, had someone tried to send this box to an address connected to Daniel's father? Daniel knew he should probably just contact the shipping company and return everything. This was someone else's property, someone else's memories. But he also knew he wasn't going to do that. Not yet, maybe not at all, because somewhere in this box might be answers to questions he didn't even know he had about his father. He pulled out his laptop and started searching. Robert Sullivan, Tacoma, Washington. The results were overwhelming. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of Robert Sullivans. Adding Vietnam veteran helped narrow it down, but not enough. He was going to need more information. Daniel spent the next hour carefully photographing every letter, every picture, every scrap of paper in the box. He was looking for clues, for anything that might help him track down Robert Sullivan. As the evening light faded and he had to turn on the kitchen lamp, Daniel realized something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just about returning a package anymore. This was about finding out who his father really was, before the heart condition and the quiet life in Portland. Before he became just a handful of fading memories in a young boy's mind. This was about finding the man in the photograph who smiled like he owned the world, who had a best friend named Bobby, and who made promises about brotherhood that somehow, decades later, had led this box to Daniel's door. He closed the wooden box carefully and sat in the quiet of his apartment, listening to the rain start up again outside. Tomorrow he'd start looking for answers. Tonight he just wanted to sit with this strange gift that had fallen into his life, a wrong delivery that felt more right than anything had in a long time. Daniel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph of the two soldiers. His father, young and alive, smiling in a way Daniel had never seen in the few photos his mother kept. By 5 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep and made coffee, then sat at his kitchen table with the wooden box open in front of him. The first logical step was to contact the shipping company. Daniel found the tracking number on the label and called their customer service line as soon as they opened at 8. After being transferred 3 times and explaining the situation twice, he finally got someone who seemed capable of helping. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't provide information about the sender due to privacy policies," the woman on the phone said in that rehearsed way that meant she'd said it 1,000 times before. "I'm not asking for personal information." Daniel tried to keep the frustration out of his voice. "I just need to return this package to the right person. It was clearly sent to me by mistake." "The address on the label matches your residence, correct?" "Yes, but the name doesn't match. Then the sender may have addressed it incorrectly. You can refuse the delivery and it will be returned to sender. But I've already opened it, and I think this might be important. Can you at least tell me if the sender left a phone number? There was typing on the other end, then a sigh. I'm sorry, sir. There's no phone number on file, just the P.O. Box return address you can see on the label. You're welcome to send it back yourself if you'd like. Daniel thanked her and hung up, knowing he'd gotten nowhere. He looked at the P.O. Box number again. That was something at least. Maybe he could drive to Tacoma and ask at the post office. But would they even tell him anything? Probably not. He picked up his phone and opened Facebook, typing Robert Sullivan into the search bar. The results were exactly as overwhelming as he'd expected. Hundreds of profiles, most of them private. Many of them showing middle-aged or older men who could theoretically be the right person. He tried adding Tacoma and Vietnam veteran to the search, scrolling through dozens of profiles and coming up empty. LinkedIn was the same story. Robert Sullivan was apparently a very common name, and without more specific information, Daniel was just guessing. His girlfriend, Rachel, called around 10. Hey, you want to grab lunch later? There's that new Thai place near my office. Can you actually come over here instead? Daniel asked. I need your help with something. Is everything okay? You sound weird. I'm fine. I just need a second pair of eyes on something. Rachel arrived an hour later with sandwiches and an expression that said she was already worried. She worked as a librarian and had a natural instinct for research that Daniel hoped would help him now. Okay, what's going on? She asked, setting the food on the counter. Daniel showed her the box, walked her through everything he'd found, and watched her face change from curious to concerned to completely absorbed. She picked up the photograph of the two soldiers and studied it for a long moment. Daniel, this really looks like your dad. I know. Did you ask your mom about this? Not yet. I wanted to see if I could find anything first. Rachel set down the photo and pulled out her phone. Let me try something different. Do you have all the letters? Daniel handed her the stack of old V-mail correspondence. Rachel untied the string carefully and started reading through them, taking notes on her phone. After about 20 minutes, she looked up. Okay, so from what I can tell, your dad and this Robert guy were in the same unit. They mention a Captain Morrison a few times, and there are references to places that sound like they're in Vietnam. Cu Chi Da Nang. They were really close, Daniel, like brothers close. I got that impression too. But here's the thing, Rachel continued, still scrolling through her notes. The letters stop. The last one from your dad is dated March 1971, and he mentions coming home soon. After that, nothing. No more letters to Robert. Maybe they just stayed in touch other ways. Maybe. But Robert's letters keep coming for a few more months. Look at this one from June 1971. She handed Daniel a letter. He's asking why your dad hasn't written back. He sounds worried. Daniel read the letter. Robert's tone had shifted from the easy camaraderie of the earlier letters to something more desperate. Dave, I don't know if you're getting these or if you just don't want to write back. I know things got bad at the end. I know what we saw. But we made a promise, remember? Brothers forever. Please write back. Let me know you're okay. What do you think happened? Daniel asked. Rachel shook her head. I don't know, but I think we need to look at these photographs more carefully. Do you have a magnifying glass? Daniel found one in his desk drawer, something he used occasionally for design work. Rachel spread the photographs out on the table and started examining them one by one, taking pictures with her phone whenever she found something interesting. Look at this, she said, handing Daniel the magnifying glass and pointing to one of the group photos. You can see name tapes on some of the uniforms. Chen Sullivan, Morrison, Martinez. And look at the patch on their shoulders. Do you know what unit that is? Daniel didn't, but Rachel was already typing into her phone. Within minutes, she'd identified the patch as belonging to a specific infantry division that served in Vietnam. More searching led them to a Veterans Association website for that division. There's a contact form here, Rachel said. Maybe we could reach out, ask if anyone knows Robert Sullivan or your dad? It felt like a long shot, but Daniel had nothing else. He spent the next hour crafting a careful message explaining the situation without going into too much detail. He attached a photo of the two soldiers together, with faces slightly blurred for privacy, and asked if anyone could help him locate Robert Sullivan or provide information about the unit these men served in. After he sent it, Rachel suggested they look more carefully at that piece of paper with the addresses on it. The one that had Daniel's current address written in different ink. This is really weird, she said. How would anyone know your address? And why write it next to your dad's old address? That's what I keep asking myself. Wait, what if someone was trying to track down your dad and found you instead? Like maybe Robert has been trying to find your father for years and someone helped him search, and they found your address through public records or something. It made a certain kind of sense, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Robert Sullivan had been looking for his father, did that mean Robert didn't know that Daniel's dad had died 26 years ago, and who had actually sent this package? I think you need to talk to your mom, Rachel said gently. She might know something about Robert Sullivan, or at least she might know why your dad stopped talking about the war. Daniel had been avoiding that conversation, but he knew Rachel was right. He picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and warm. Daniel, how nice to hear from you. Is everything all right? Yeah, Mom, everything's fine. Listen, I need to ask you something about Dad. There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable. Okay. Did Dad ever mention someone named Robert Sullivan? Or Bobby Sullivan? Someone he served with in Vietnam? The pause was longer this time. When his mother spoke again, her voice had changed. Why are you asking about this? Daniel explained about the package, the photographs, the letters. His mother was silent through all of it. Mom, are you still there? I'm here. She took a breath.
Daniel, your father didn't talk about the war.
Not with me, not with anyone. When we met, he'd been back for a few years and he'd already decided to leave all of that behind him. I asked about it once or twice early on, and he made it clear it wasn't something he wanted to discuss. But did he ever mention friends from the war? Anyone he stayed in touch with? Not that I knew about. Your father had nightmares sometimes, especially in the early years. He'd wake up calling out names I didn't recognize. I always assumed they were people he'd served with, but he never explained, and I learned not to ask. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He'd been too young to remember his father's nightmares, too young to understand that his quiet dad might have been carrying heavy things that couldn't be shared. Do you think Robert Sullivan was someone important to him? He asked. If these letters are real, if these photographs are what you think they are, then yes. I think Robert Sullivan was very important to your father. And I think something happened that made your father want to forget about him. What could have happened that was that bad? War, Daniel. War happened. I don't know the specifics, and I don't know if I want to. Your father made his choice to move forward, to build a new life. Maybe we should respect that. But Daniel couldn't respect that, not now. Not when he had a box full of his father's history sitting on his kitchen table, and not when someone out there had tried to reconnect these two men after decades of silence. After he hung up with his mother, Rachel squeezed his hand. So what do you want to do? Daniel looked at the address in Tacoma again. It was about 3 hours away, maybe less depending on traffic. I think I need to go there, to Tacoma. That address might not be current, but it's the only real lead I have. When do you want to go? Tomorrow. I'll drive up in the morning, see what I can find out. Rachel nodded. I'm coming with you. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. Plus, you're terrible at talking to strangers. You'll need me. She wasn't wrong. Daniel had always been more comfortable behind a computer screen than face-to-face with people. Having Rachel there would help. That night, Daniel went through every photograph again, every letter, making notes about names and places mentioned. He created a timeline of when the letters were written and tried to figure out what might have happened in March 1971 that caused his father to stop writing. He found a reference in one of the last letters to something called the incident at the village. Neither his father nor Robert gave details, but the tone suggested something terrible had happened, something that had shaken both of them deeply. As Daniel finally tried to sleep around midnight, his mind wouldn't stop turning over the possibilities. Tomorrow he'd drive to Tacoma. Tomorrow he might find answers, or he might find nothing but dead ends. Either way, he had to try. The wooden box sat on his kitchen table, filled with the ghosts of two young men who'd promised to be brothers forever. One of those men was his father. The other was somewhere out there, maybe still alive, maybe still wondering what had happened to his friend. Daniel had to find him. Not just to return the box, but to understand who his father had been before the quiet life in Portland. Before the heart attack that took him too soon. He needed to know the man in the photograph who smiled like he owned the world, and had a friend who would write letters for months hoping for a response that never came. The drive to Tacoma started out quiet. Daniel navigated through Portland's morning traffic, while Rachel sat in the passenger seat with the wooden box carefully secured on her lap. They'd left early to avoid the worst of the commute, and now they were heading north on Interstate 5, watching the landscape shift from urban sprawl to stretches of pine forest. "You nervous?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. "What if we get there and find nothing? Or what if we find something I don't want to know? Then we deal with it together." The address they were looking for was in an older part of Tacoma, not far from the waterfront. According to the GPS, it should take them about 2.5 hours. Daniel had checked the address on Google Maps the night before, using the Street View feature to see what they'd find. The building looked like it had been renovated sometime in the past decade. He couldn't tell if it was apartments or something else. They stopped for coffee about an hour into the drive. Rachel bought a map of Tacoma from the gas station, the old-fashioned paper kind, and spread it out on the hood of the car. "We should have a plan," she said. "We can't just knock on doors asking if anyone knows a Robert Sullivan from 50 years ago." "Why not?" "Because normal people don't do that, Daniel. We need to be smart about this." They decided to start with the address itself, see what kind of building it was, and then check with nearby businesses or neighbors. If that didn't work, they'd try the local library or city records office. Rachel, with her librarian skills, was confident they could track down property records or old phone directories. By the time they reached Tacoma, Daniel's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. He followed the GPS directions through residential streets lined with older houses until they reached the address. What they found wasn't what either of them expected. The building was a community center. The sign out front read, "Tacoma Veterans Community Center," and there were several cars in the parking lot. Daniel pulled in and turned off the engine, staring at the building. "This is either really good luck or really weird," Rachel said. "Both," Daniel replied. They got out of the car, and Daniel grabbed the wooden box from the back seat. Inside, the community center was bright and welcoming. There was a front desk where an older woman sat working on a computer. Behind her, Daniel could see a large common room where several elderly men were sitting around tables, some playing cards, others just talking. The woman at the desk looked up as they approached and smiled. "Can I help you folks?" Daniel set the box on the desk carefully. "This is going to sound strange, but I'm looking for someone named Robert Sullivan. I think he might have lived at this address a long time ago, or maybe he used to come here." The woman's expression changed immediately, shifting from polite interest to something Daniel couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, mixed with concern. "Bobby Sullivan?" she asked. "Are you family?" Daniel's heart started racing. "Not exactly. I received this package by mistake, and I'm trying to return it to him." "Do you know him?" The woman stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Bobby was a regular here for years. Lovely man. He volunteered, helped organize events, spent time with the younger vets. But he doesn't come around anymore. Do you know where I can find him?" She hesitated, and Daniel could see her weighing whether to share information with strangers. Rachel stepped forward, her voice gentle. "I know this seems unusual, but Daniel's father served with Mr. Sullivan in Vietnam. We think this box contains items that belong to him. We just want to return them." The woman looked at the wooden box, then back at Daniel. "Bobby moved to an assisted living facility about 6 months ago. His health started declining, and his family thought it would be better for him to have full-time care." "Can I ask what's in the box?" "Photographs and letters from the war. I think Mr. Sullivan was trying to send them somewhere, and they ended up at my address by mistake." The woman nodded slowly. "That sounds like something Bobby would do. He talked about his war buddies a lot, especially one friend he lost touch with after they came home. It bothered him for years. He was always trying to track people down, reconnect with folks from his unit." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Do you remember the name of the friend he was looking for?" "I don't, I'm sorry. It's been a while since Bobby's been here, but I can give you the name of the care facility where he's staying if you'd like. I'm sure he'd be happy to see visitors, especially if you knew his friend from the war." She wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Daniel. "It's called Comfort Care Residence. It's only about 15 minutes from here. Tell them Linda from the community center sent you. They know me there, it might help." Daniel thanked her, and they walked back to the car in silence. Rachel waited until they were both seated before speaking. "Are you ready for this?" "No, but let's go anyway." Comfort Care Residence was a modern building with well-maintained grounds. It didn't have that institutional feel that some care facilities had. Instead, it looked more like a nice apartment complex with extra medical facilities. Daniel signed in at the front desk, explained that Linda had sent them, and asked if they could visit Robert Sullivan. The nurse at the desk checked her computer. Mr. Sullivan doesn't get many visitors. His nephew comes by once a month or so, but other than that, he's pretty much alone. Let me check if he's up for company. She made a quick phone call, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up. He'd love to see you. He's in room 127 down that hall and to the right. Just knock before you go in. Daniel's hands were shaking as he carried the box down the hallway. Rachel walked beside him, her presence steadying. When they reached room 127, Daniel took a deep breath and knocked. Come in, a voice called from inside. Daniel pushed open the door and stepped into a bright room with large windows overlooking a garden. Sitting in a chair by the window was an elderly man with white hair and a weathered face. He was thin, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, and when he looked up at Daniel, his eyes were still sharp and blue. Hello, Robert Sullivan said. The nurse said I had visitors, but I didn't catch your names. Daniel crossed the room and set the wooden box on the small table beside Robert's chair. My name is Daniel Kim. This is my girlfriend, Rachel. I think this box belongs to you. It was delivered to my house by mistake. Robert looked at the box, and for a moment nothing happened. Then his hand reached out slowly, touching the carved lid, and his entire body seemed to crumple. His face twisted and tears started rolling down his cheeks before Daniel even understood what was happening. My God, Robert whispered. This is Dave's box, our box. Where did you find this? Daniel knelt down beside the chair. It was sent to my address, Mr. Sullivan. My father was David Kim. I think you knew him as Dave Chen before he changed his last name. I think you served together. Robert's hands were shaking as he opened the box. He pulled out the top photograph, the one of the two young soldiers with their arms around each other, and pressed it against his chest. The tears were flowing freely now, and he was making sounds that were somewhere between laughing and sobbing. Dave, he kept saying. My God, Dave. Rachel quietly left the room and returned a moment later with tissues and a glass of water. They waited while Robert composed himself enough to speak, though his hands never stopped trembling. I've been looking for him for 50 years, Robert finally said, his voice hoarse. 50 years? I tried everything. I hired people to search. I called every David Chen I could find. I never stopped looking. Daniel felt his own eyes burning. Mr. Sullivan, I need to tell you something. My father passed away 26 years ago. I was only 8. I'm so sorry. Robert closed his eyes, fresh tears leaking out. I was afraid of that. As the years went by, I started to think maybe he was gone. But I kept hoping. I kept thinking maybe one day the phone would ring and it would be him, calling to say he was sorry for the silence, that he was ready to talk again. What happened? Daniel asked. Why did he stop writing to you? Robert was quiet for a long time, holding the photograph, staring at two young men who had no idea what the future would bring. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was seeing something far away. We made a promise in Vietnam. We saved each other's lives more times than I can count. When the bullets were flying and everything was chaos, we knew we could count on each other. Brothers, that's what we called ourselves. Not by blood, but by choice. Brothers forever. He set down the photograph and picked up one of the letters, unfolding it with careful fingers. Your father was the best man I ever knew. Brave, smart, funny when he wanted to be. He kept us all going when things got dark. And they got dark, Daniel. They got so dark. Robert paused, and Daniel could see him struggling with the memories. There was an incident. March 1971. We were on patrol near a village. Everything went wrong. There were casualties, terrible casualties. Things we saw, things we had to do. Your father was right in the middle of it, trying to save people. He pulled 3 wounded soldiers out of the line of fire. He was a hero. But something changed in him that day. I could see it. We all could. When we finally made it back to base, he wouldn't talk about it. And then a few weeks later, we got our orders to go home. I thought that would help, you know? I thought once we were back in the States, away from the war, we could process everything together. We made plans. We were going to stay close, visit each other, make sure we were both okay. Robert's voice cracked. But when I got home to Tacoma, I started writing to him at the address he'd given me. I sent letter after letter. He never wrote back. I called the number he'd left, but it was disconnected. I didn't understand. We were brothers. We'd promised. Why would he just disappear? Daniel thought about what his mother had said, about his father's nightmares and his refusal to talk about the war. I think he was trying to protect himself. My mom said he had PTSD, though they didn't call it that back then. He just wanted to forget. I get that now, Robert said. It took me years, but I finally understood. Some people deal with trauma by facing it, and some people deal with it by walking away. Your father walked away, and that included walking away from everyone who reminded him of that time, including me. He looked at Daniel with those sharp blue eyes, but I never forgot him, and I never stopped hoping that somehow, some way I'd find him again. I kept all of this. He gestured to the box, because it was all I had left of the best friend I ever had. Rachel, who had been quiet this whole time, spoke up. Mr. Sullivan, can I ask how this box ended up at Daniel's address? Robert wiped his eyes and took a shaky breath. My nephew, Michael. He helps me with things now that I can't get around so well anymore. A few months ago, I told him I wanted to make one last try at finding Dave. I had his old address from the 70s, the one in Portland. Michael searched online and found an address for someone named David Kim at a different Portland address. He thought maybe your father had changed his last name, which turned out to be right. Michael sent the box? Daniel asked. He was supposed to. But his own life got busy, and I think he got confused with the addresses. I keep forgetting to ask him if he ever sent it. Robert looked at the box with wonder, but somehow it got to you. Dave's son. After all these years, it found its way home. They sat together for a long time, Robert telling stories about Daniel's father that Daniel had never heard. About the time Dave had shared his rations with starving village children, even though it meant going hungry himself. About the night they'd stayed up talking about the futures they wanted to build, the families they hoped to have. About the way Dave used to sing off-key to annoy everyone else in their unit. He talked about you, you know, Robert said suddenly. Before you were born, when he found out your mom was pregnant. He was so excited. He said he was going to be the best dad in the world. He said his kid would never doubt that he was loved. Daniel had to look away, blinking hard. Daniel stayed in that room for 3 hours, listening to Robert talk about his father. Every story felt like a gift, filling in pieces of a man Daniel had barely known. Rachel stepped out at some point to give them privacy, and when she returned with coffee from the cafeteria, Robert was showing Daniel a scar on his arm. Your father saved my life the day I got this, Robert said, tracing the long white line that ran from his wrist to his elbow, shrapnel from a grenade. I was bleeding out, probably would have died if Dave hadn't dragged me to cover and tied a tourniquet. He stayed with me the whole time, talking to me, keeping me conscious until the medic arrived. Daniel stared at the scar, something physical and real that proved these stories weren't just memories but actual events that had happened. His father had saved this man's life. Did my father have any scars? Daniel asked. I was so young when he died, I don't remember. Robert nodded slowly. He had one on his back. Got it during that last incident I mentioned, the one in March. A piece of metal caught him when he was pulling someone out of the line of fire. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was a reminder. He hated that scar. They fell quiet for a moment, and Daniel noticed how tired Robert looked. The emotional weight of the reunion was taking its toll on the elderly man. But there was something else Daniel needed to know. Mr. Sullivan, what exactly happened in March 1971? You said there was an incident, but you didn't give details. I think I need to understand what changed my father so much that he couldn't even talk to his best friend anymore. Robert's face went gray. He set down his coffee cup with a shaking hand and looked out the window at the garden below. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Are you sure you want to know? Some things, once you hear them, you can't unhear them. I'm sure. Robert took a long, rattling breath. We were on a patrol near a village called Bin An. It was supposed to be routine. But nothing in that war was routine. We got ambiguous intelligence about enemy activity in the area. When we arrived, things seemed normal at first. Just villagers going about their day. But then someone fired at us. We returned fire, and everything went to chaos. He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. In the confusion, civilians got caught in the crossfire. Women, children. Your father tried to stop it. He was screaming at everyone to cease fire, but the noise, the fear, the adrenaline, it was all too much. By the time it ended, there were casualties. Innocent casualties. Daniel felt sick to his stomach. Your father blamed himself, Robert continued, even though he'd tried to stop it. Even though the official report cleared him of any wrongdoing, he blamed himself. He carried those faces with him. I know because I carried them too. We all did. But Dave, he took it harder than anyone. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. When we finally got sent home a few weeks later, I thought maybe getting away from Vietnam would help him heal. But it didn't, Daniel said. No. It made it worse. Back home, he couldn't forget. He couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And everyone around him, everyone who hadn't been there, they couldn't understand. How could they? So he decided to bury it all, change his name from Chen to Kim, his mother's maiden name, move to a different city, cut ties with anyone who reminded him of the war. Including me. Robert's eyes were wet again. I tried to respect that for a while. I stopped writing after a year or so of no responses. I figured if Dave needed space, I'd give it to him. But I never stopped thinking about him. Never stopped wondering if he was okay, if he'd found peace, if he'd built the life he wanted. He did build a life, Daniel said. He married my mom. He worked as an accountant. He was quiet, and I know he had nightmares, but he was a good father for the 8 years I had with him. That's what I hoped for, Robert said, that he'd found some measure of peace. Rachel, who had been listening quietly, asked, Mr. Sullivan, did you ever try to find him again after you stopped writing? I tried a few times over the years. In the 80s, I hired a private investigator. That's when I learned he'd changed his name to Kim. The investigator found an address in Portland, but by the time I got the information, it was outdated. Your father had moved. I tried again in the 90s, but I couldn't afford another investigator. I searched phone books, called every Kim in Portland I could find. Nothing worked. He looked at Daniel with an expression that held 50 years of regret. I never thought about looking for his family. I didn't even know if he'd gotten married or had kids. If I had thought to search for David Kim's family instead of just David Kim himself, I might have found you years ago. Daniel felt the weight of all those missed connections. All those years that Robert had spent searching while Daniel had grown up, never knowing his father had a best friend who was looking for him. If Robert had found them earlier, when Daniel's father was still alive, could they have reconnected? Could his father have faced those demons with the one person who truly understood? I wish you'd found him, Daniel said. I wish he'd answered your letters. I wish a lot of things. So do I, Robert whispered. They sat in heavy silence until Rachel gently suggested that maybe they should let Robert rest. The older man looked exhausted, like the emotional reunion had drained every bit of energy he had. But as Daniel started to stand, Robert grabbed his hand. Wait, there's something else. Something I need to show you. Robert pointed to a small drawer in the table beside his bed. Open that. Daniel pulled open the drawer and found a stack of letters tied with string, just like the ones in the wooden box. These were different, though. The paper was the same, the handwriting was the same, but these envelopes had never been opened. They were addressed to Robert Sullivan in Tacoma, but they'd never been mailed. What are these? Daniel asked. Letters your father wrote but never sent. When Michael was cleaning out some of Dave's old addresses for me, checking databases and records, he found something interesting. Your father's widow, your mother, had kept boxes of his things in storage. Michael tracked down the storage facility and contacted your mother. She gave him permission to look through the boxes to see if there was anything that might help locate Dave's old military friends for a memorial project Michael was working on. That's how he found these. Daniel's hands were shaking as he untied the string and opened the first letter. It was dated July 1971, just a few months after his father had stopped responding to Robert's letters. Dear Bobby, it read, I'm sorry I haven't written. I'm sorry for a lot of things. I keep trying to pick up the pen and tell you what I'm feeling, but the words won't come. All I can think about is been on. I see those faces every time I close my eyes. I hear the screaming. I know you told me it wasn't my fault, that we were just following orders, but I can't accept that. I can't live with what we did. I need to forget, Bobby. I need to become someone new, someone who wasn't there. I hope you can understand. You were my brother, and you always will be, but I can't carry the past with me anymore. I hope you find peace. I hope you have a good life. I'm sorry. Daniel read through letter after letter. There were dozens of them, written over the course of several years. Each one said essentially the same thing. I'm sorry. I can't talk to you. I need to move forward. I hope you understand. His father had been writing to Robert all along, pouring out his guilt and his pain and his desperate need to leave the war behind. He just hadn't been able to send them. My mother had these? Daniel asked. According to Michael, yes. She found them in your father's things after he died. She never knew what to do with them, so she kept them in storage. She didn't know how to find me to give them to me. Daniel felt a surge of anger that surprised him. His mother had known about Robert all this time. She'd had these letters that proved how much his father had struggled, how much he'd wanted to explain to his best friend but couldn't. And she'd never said anything. "Why wouldn't she tell me?" he said out loud. Rachel put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe she was trying to protect you. You were just a kid when your father died, and these letters, they're painful to read. But I deserve to know. Maybe she didn't think you were ready. Or maybe she was respecting your father's wishes to leave the past behind." Robert cleared his throat. "Don't be too hard on your mother, Daniel. She was in an impossible position. Your father had made it clear he didn't want to dwell on the war. After he died, she probably didn't know what the right thing to do was. And maybe she thought that tracking me down would just open old wounds that were better left closed." Daniel knew they were probably right, but it still stung. All these years he could have known about Robert. He could have heard these stories about his father. Instead, he'd grown up with only fragments of memories and a handful of photographs that didn't tell him anything about who his father really was. "There's one more thing," Robert said, his voice growing weaker. "The last letter. The one your father wrote but never finished. It's in the bottom of that stack." Daniel found it, an envelope that wasn't sealed, with a letter inside that stopped mid-sentence. It was dated just a few weeks before his father died. "Dear Bobby," it began. "I'm writing this because my doctor told me I need to make peace with things. My heart isn't doing well, and they say I might not have much time left. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About all the things I should have said and didn't. About the promises I broke. I know I hurt you by disappearing. I know you probably spent years wondering what happened to your friend. The truth is, I was never as strong as you thought I was. I couldn't carry the weight of what we saw and what we did. I couldn't be the man you deserved to have as a brother. But I want you to know that I never stopped thinking about you. You saved my life more than once in Vietnam, and I never properly thanked you for that. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you've had a good life, full of love and happiness. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to face the past with you. I'm sorry I chose to walk away instead of walk beside you. If anything happens to me, I hope someone tells you that you were the best friend I ever had, and I hope you can forgive me for being the worst friend to you. I have a son now, Daniel. He's 8 years old, and he's the best thing that ever happened to me. If you ever meet him someday, please tell him—" The letter ended there. His father had never finished it. He'd never said what he wanted Robert to tell Daniel. A heart attack had taken him before he could write those final words. Daniel sat there holding the unfinished letter, crying in a way he hadn't cried since he was 8 years old and didn't understand why his father wasn't coming home. Robert was crying too, and Rachel had tears streaming down her face. 3 people in a room, connected by a man who had been gone for 26 years but whose presence was more real in that moment than it had been in decades. "He loved you," Daniel finally said to Robert. "He loved you enough to keep writing even if he couldn't send the letters." "And I loved him," Robert replied. "Enough to keep searching even when it seemed hopeless." They stayed together until the evening, until the nurses came to check on Robert and suggested that he needed rest. Daniel promised to come back the next day and the day after that, and as many days as it took to hear every story Robert could remember about his father. As they were leaving, Robert called out one more time, "Daniel, your father wanted to tell you something in that letter. He never got to finish it, but I think I know what he would have said. He would have wanted me to tell you that he loved you more than anything in this world, that you were his redemption, his reason for getting up every morning and trying to be better. He would have wanted you to know that even though he couldn't face his past, he believed in your future." Daniel nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the room with Rachel's arm around his waist, holding him up. Daniel didn't go back to Portland that night. He and Rachel got a hotel room in Tacoma, and Daniel lay awake until 3 in the morning, reading and rereading his father's unsent letters by the light of his phone. Each one was a window into pain he'd never known his father carried, love he'd never known his father felt for the friend he'd left behind. The next morning, they returned to Comfort Care residence. Robert was sitting by the window again, but this time he smiled when they walked in. The grief of the previous day had transformed into something else. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon," Robert said. "I promised I would," Daniel replied. setting down the bag of breakfast sandwiches Rachel had insisted they bring. Besides, you haven't told me about the time my dad apparently challenged someone to an arm wrestling contest while drunk on base. Robert laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him. Oh, that story. He didn't just challenge someone. He challenged our entire unit. Lost every single match, but he kept going anyway. Stubborn as they come, your father. They spent the morning trading stories. Daniel told Robert about the few memories he had of his father. The way his dad used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, always burning the first one. How he'd taught Daniel to ride a bike in their driveway, running alongside him until Daniel finally found his balance. Small, ordinary moments that took on new meaning now that Daniel understood the weight his father had been carrying through all of them. He was trying so hard to be normal, Robert said softly, to be just a regular dad with a regular life. He was a good dad, Daniel said. Even though he died when I was young, I never doubted that he loved me. That's what he would have wanted most, to be remembered as your father, not as a soldier. Over the next week, Daniel made the drive to Tacoma 4 more times. He couldn't stay away. Each visit brought new stories, new insights into who his father had been. Rachel came with him twice more, but then she encouraged him to go alone, said that this was something he and Robert needed to do together. On his 4th visit, Daniel brought his mother. He'd called her the day after first meeting Robert, told her everything. She'd been quiet on the phone, so quiet that Daniel thought she'd hung up. Then she'd started crying and said, I should have tried to find him. I should have given him those letters. You can give them to him now, Daniel had said. His mother was nervous during the entire drive to Tacoma. Daniel had never seen her so anxious. She kept fidgeting with her purse, checking her makeup in the mirror, asking if she looked okay. Mom, you look fine. He's not going to judge you. I kept his letters from reaching his best friend for 26 years, Daniel. I think he has every right to judge me. But when they walked into Robert's room and his mother saw the elderly man by the window, her anxiety melted away. Robert stood up slowly, using his cane, and she crossed the room and hugged him like she'd known him her whole life. I'm so sorry, she said into his shoulder. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. You found me now, Robert said. That's what matters.